Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our fifth webinar in the series of requirements engineering, in this case about requirements management. My name is Jose Muñoz. I'm currently working as a consultant in Visure requirement. In the past years, I've been gathering experience in different projects as a business analyst and assistant engineer, and also conducting some trainings about requirement. I will be sharing in this webinar series those experience and good practice when working with requirement. Today, as the fifth webinar in the series, we will be recapping the concepts already learned in the first webinar about requirements engineering and the different activities that are included in the requirements engineering, and we will be finally explaining about requirements management itself. There is a bit of a confusion with the title maybe, because in all the advertise we have used the title requirements management for the whole series, not just for this specific webinar. And that's because requirements management is something more, let's say, popular or more common when talking about requirement. But in fact, these webinars are not just about the requirements management that well, of course, we will be talking in this specific one about requirements management, but this whole series is not just about management, but also about engineering and all the activities, which is more than just the management of the requirements, of course. So before starting with today's webinar, I would like to just explain a bit about the interface of the webinar. All of the attendees are mute, so you can use the question tab in the question section in the GoToMeeting interface in order to post any question that we will be answering at the end of the webinar. We will have some time for questions and answer. Additionally, we will be recording this webinar so we can upload it to YouTube or any other media channel afterward. So if you are watching the webinar from one of these media channel, welcome to you too. And let's start with today's webinar. So the first thing is just the agenda for today, which is going to be the current one. Basically, I'm going to just talk a bit about the company, about Visure solution. Just one slide. I promise I will be very fast about this, but just in order to introduce our company. After that, we will be jumping to the next section, which is basically about recapping, about summarizing what we have already learned in the previous webinars. Once again, I suggest that if you are watching this video as the first one in the series, I will strongly recommend to watch the first 4 videos, which are available in our channel. But anyway, we will be just remembering some of the concepts that we have already learned about requirements engineering. Okay. After that, sorry. After that, we will be talking about requirements management, a little introduction about the requirements management process, some definitions, what's requirement management, what are the activities or the tasks included in the requirements management project. And after that, we will be focusing on what we are going to do today, which is requirements management for attributes. Today, we are going to talk a lot specifically about attributes, about how to prioritize, how to use workflows, how to assign different kinds of attributes to the requirements in order to give more information to the users regarding those very requirements. And after that, we will also have a short demonstration about Visure requirements focusing on the attributes. So we can just see exactly how a professional tool and specifically Visure requirements, is going to help us to work with the attributes and to manage those attributes. And at the end, we will have some time for summarizing everything and just some questions and answers. So with that being said, let's start with the webinar. And as I was mentioning, the first topic is going to be just introduction, Visure Solution, the company. As I promised, very quick, very fast. Visure Solution is a company specialized in requirements engineering for both system engineering world and software engineering world. At the end, requirements are everywhere, not just when building software, but also when building a system. And we pick the best of both worlds and we put that into our tool, and we pick best practices of both worlds in order to include them into our tool. We are manufacturers and distributors of Visure requirement, our leading requirement solution. But not only that, we also offer some courses, training, and consultancy all around requirements. And in fact, we also offer some training in order to certify yourself in IREP, for example, which is the International Requirements Engineering Board. Our headquarters are located in San Francisco in the United States, and we have got also offices in UK, Spain, and Germany. As I say, just one slide about the company. I don't want to bore you, so just let's summarize the previous webinar. Let's just remember a bit. Let's just refresh the concept that we have already learned when talking about requirements. So what's requirements engineering? Okay, for that, I suggest just going to the previous webinar, but the important thing is that in requirements engineering, we have explained that there are 4 main activities that we have to accomplish. We are saying activities and not stages, and this is important, okay? Because the stages give you this sensation, this impression that we are going to do the first one, then the second one, then the third one, then the fourth, and we are done. No, they are activities because we are going to jumping forward and backward at any given point. We are going to start with the elicitation, then go to analysis, or maybe at the same time we are eliciting requirement, we will be analyzing them, then we jump to the specification and we discover that we have forget something and we have to go back to the elicitation and also analyzing and so on and so on. So it's important to define those tasks that we are going to perform during the requirements engineering process as activities, not just stages. Okay, and the 4 main activities for each one of them, we have got already a webinar uploaded. Those 4 activities are going to be elicitation, analysis, documentation or specification, and validation. Okay, the first one, once again, remember that this is the order, but we are going to be jumping backward and forward. So the first thing is probably the elicitation or the gathering of the requirement. Basically, we are going to try to pick up the requirements wherever they are in the mind of someone. We have to conduct interviews, we have to analyze documentation, whatever. Okay, and this is usually a more problem-oriented than solution-oriented, because the first thing is just to understand the problem in order to pick up or to gather the requirement out of that situation. Basically, this activity is about discovering the boundaries of the right system to be built. Okay, we have to define what are the boundaries, what are the limits of our system. Okay, it's a collaborative work between the stakeholders and requirements engineering. Important word here is stakeholders, not just users, but stakeholders. A stakeholder is a more wide concept than just user. Okay, it's about finding the requirement and the different authorized sources for each one of them. It's about making explicit what is implicit. That is really common when talking about a requirement. Oh, I didn't mention about this because that was so obvious, or it was so clear for me. Yeah, but not for everyone. And for doing that, we are going to use different techniques in order to gather the requirements. We are going to use interviews, probably the most common technique. We are going to do questionnaires. We are going to do maybe brainstorming sessions. We are to prototype the system or the software that we are going to build, and so on and so on. So once we have started with the requirements gathering, or even at the same time that we are gathering the requirements, we have to analyze those requirements. And analyzing the requirement is about understanding the requirement and negotiating those requirements with the different stakeholders. Okay, how we're going to do that? Well, usually by means of models that are going to help us to better understand the problem, to better understand the situation. And also, sorry, we have to make sure that those requirements are matching the needs of the stakeholders. Okay, this is super important. And this is what we are going to do in the analysis. It's basically about understanding those requirements that we are gathering. If we are gathering requirements and understanding those requirements, eventually we have to put down those requirements somewhere, usually in a requirements document. And specifying is about writing the requirements once we have properly understood them. Okay, it is really important. As important as understanding the requirement is that everyone that reads those requirements understand the same thing. For that, there are certain rules that we can accomplish when writing down the requirement or the requirement specification, because the requirement must be clear, they must be atomic, talking only about one thing, they must be unambiguous. Okay, everyone that reads the requirement must understand the same thing. Needed, design free. We shouldn't start designing the solution. We are just gathering the requirements. They must be complete, correct, traceable, and so on and so on. I don't want to repeat the whole previous webinar, but I strongly recommend this third. I think this was the second or the third webinar in the series in which we explain each one of these rules. So remember this, and this is an important thing. Requirements are going to be written once, but they are going to be read thousands of times. So please, let's spend some time writing those requirements properly. And finally, the last activity in the set of activities that are included in the requirements engineering is going to be the validation. Okay, we have distinguished between validation and verification. Verification, it's about building, it's about ensuring that the system being built is right. Okay, it's working fine. But validation, which is what we are going to focus, it's about ensuring that the right system is being built. Okay, because we can create a system and it's working fine, but it's not exactly what the user asked for. Okay, and in order to check that, we are going to perform the validation. Okay, it's an ongoing process and it's going to happen at the end of the requirement validation step, but also in every other stage. When we are gathering the requirements with the stakeholders, we are just validating that we have understand properly what they have asked for. When we are specifying, we are going to make sure that it's exactly what is needed, and so on and so on. So it's not going to be done at the end, but at the whole requirements engineering process. Okay, we have reviewed several validation techniques like checks, traceability, super important. Traceability is key for validation. Ensuring that the requirements are well-written, prototypes. Prototyping is a technique for gathering requirements, but also for validating those requirements, functional text design, reviews, models, and so on and so on. Okay, so those are the main 4 activities in the requirements engineering process. So with that clear, with that in mind, what are we going to be talking about today? Well, we are going to talk about requirements management. And what exactly is requirements management? Well, some definitions in here, okay? According to Ian Somerville, requirements management is the process of managing changing requirements during the requirements engineering process and the system development, okay? So we can see a difference here between the requirements engineering and the requirements management in this definition from Ian Somerville, in which, by the way, he focused specifically in the changes of the requirements. Okay, so according to Ian Somerville, requirement management is about managing changes, okay, in the requirements. That's completely true. That's probably one of the most, if not the most important task inside the requirements management, is about managing the changes. But we're not going to be limited to only managing changes when we talk about requirements management. We are going to try to go a bit further than that. So another definition about requirements management is that it's the process of managing changes to the requirements for a system. Again, about changes, but some additional concept. The principal concerns of requirements management are managing changes to agreed requirement. Okay, so far so good. Managing the relationship between the requirements, and this is also really important, traceability. Okay, traceability is a key activity or a key task in the requirements management process. And also managing the dependencies between the requirements document and other documents produced in the system engineering process. Again, traceability. Okay, so far we have understand that requirements management is about changes, is about managing changes, and also it's about traceability, about linking elements. Okay. Another definition, in this case from Wikipedia, of course. Requirements management is the process of documenting, analyzing, tracing, prioritizing, and agreeing on requirements, and then controlling change and communicating to relevant stakeholders. This definition, well, I don't like it completely because there are some things in here that are not exactly requirements management, but are more requirements engineering, like documenting, analyzing, and also agreeing on the requirements. But I like the part of tracing, prioritizing, controlling change. So I would like to also add this definition to the list. Okay. And the last definition, I promise, from requirements management, in this case from the CMMI. Okay, they are just defining the process of managing requirement as the manage requirements of the project products and project components, and to ensure alignment between those requirements and the project plans and work products. And they have categorized 5 subtasks in order to perform this management process. Okay, understand those requirements, obtain commitment to those requirements, manage changes on the requirements, maintain bidirectional traceability, and ensuring the alignment between the project work and the requirements. Okay, so with all those definitions in mind, with all those things, we are going to define the requirement management as a set of tasks, that we are going to perform in order to support the requirements engineering process. Okay, and the tasks that we are going to be focusing on are basically 3. We are going to focus, when talking about requirement management, about managing changes, and that is going to include sorry, versioning of the requirement, baselines of the whole specification, impact analysis, also related with the versions and with the managing changes, and other activities. All of those are going to be included in the managing changes section, let's say. We are going also to manage traceability, because traceability is going to help us for performing the whole requirements engineering process as we have defined the requirements management as the set of tasks that we are going to do in order to support the requirement engineering process. So we are going to also manage traceability between requirements and other requirements, and between requirements and any other artifact, like traceability between the requirement source and the requirement. That source can be an actor, a person, and a stakeholder, a document, whatever. traceability between requirements and use cases, between requirement and design elements, between requirements and test, and so on and so on. And finally, uh, requirements management is also about assigning attributes to the requirements, and included into those attributes, we can prioritize those requirements. We can assign workflows to those requirements. And in fact, that is going to be today's webinar main topic, the requirements, let's say, attributization, if that word exists. Requirements attributes is what we are going to be focusing today. Okay, we are going to talk about requirements management, but specifically about the attributes. In a future webinar, we will be talking about traceability and also about managing changes in another one. But on today's webinar, we are going to focus on requirements attributes. So what can we say about the requirements and requirements attributes? Well, the attributes, they represent information that is inherent to the requirement, and it must be gathered and updated along with the requirements. Let me just allow me just to add some examples in here in order to better understand what's an attribute. Okay, when we talk about requirements, we always think about that sentence that is the requirement itself, the requirement description, we can say, which is usually something like the system shall do whatever, or the user will be able to, or should, or depend the particle we're going to use, but that is going to be the requirements definition, the requirement itself. But apart from that definition, sometimes there, or well, better say that every time there are some extra information that we will like to have in order to work with the requirement. Things like what's the priority of this requirement, what's the status of this requirement, what's the cost of implementing this requirement, who asked for this requirement, what is the system that is going to be impacted by this requirement, things like that. Okay, so that's what the attributes are going to represent. Basically, it's like I was saying, it's information that is inherent to the requirement that must be gathered also along with the requirement. They're going to basically establish a context and a background, and we'll go just beyond the requirement description, as I was saying. Okay, the idea is that the requirement description is good, it's fine, but sometimes in order to be able to prioritize, to be able to just trace the requirement, to be able to test the requirement, to be able to do certain tasks, we need additional information. Maybe this requirement is just not fighting with this other requirement. We cannot implement those two requirements. So in order to fix that, we have to go to the source of the requirement, to both of the requirement sources, and just discuss with them, okay, what we are going to do. So for that, we need to keep a trace for the, or to keep that information in the requirement, which is the author, or which is the authorized source. Each requirement must include the proper values for those attributes that will be used. For example, if we have an attribute that is the priority, we have to define exactly the priority values. Maybe it's high, medium, low. Maybe it's a number from 0 to 10 or from 0 to 100. I don't know, but we have to define the values for those attributes. Maybe it's the status of the requirement. So what are going to be the different values for the requirement status, things like that. Okay. So what is going to be the use of those attributes? Well, by means of these attributes, we will be able to filter the requirements, to filter the specification. For example, I want to just focus on the requirements coming from this authorized source, or only focusing on the requirements with high priority, only focusing on the requirements with this estimated cost, or that are affecting to this specific system, things like that. Okay. It's going to help me to also perform the analysis of the requirement, because the attributes are giving me more information. It's going to help me to prioritize my system to better understand the requirement at the end. Okay, so those are going to be some of the use that we are going to do with the attributes. That's what the attributes are meant for. Okay. So what we recommend for the attributes? Well, we recommend defining the attribute that our organization are going to use and also adapt them for each specific project. Usually each company is going to have their own attributes. There are things like the priority or the status that are really common, but probably each company is going to have their own values for the priority, as I was saying before, high, medium, low, or very high, very low also, or a number from 0 to 10 for the priority, or the different status that are going to have, things like that. We have to define the attributes for each project and the values, and not just the attribute for each project, but for each specific artifact. Maybe we have some attributes for the user requirement and some other attributes for the system requirement or for the use cases or whatever. Okay. We have to keep in mind that we have also to keep balance with the requirements attributes. It's great to have attributes. It's great to have thousands of attributes with a lot of information in the requirements, but take into account that those attributes must be updated and someone must work with them. So having 1,000 attributes maybe is not as good as it seems, because in order to create one requirement, we are going to need hours, and that's something that that cannot be done. Okay, so we have to keep balance between the information that we need and the time we are going to spend for gathering all that information. It's important to identify a responsible for assigning values to each attribute and to keep them updated. And remember this, it's worth having outdated information than not have information at all. So if the priority of this requirement is high, but the requirement is saying medium or low because the priority has changed, it's better not having priority at all than having a wrong value for the priority. Okay. Some examples in the when working with attributes, well, we can have the creation date of the requirement, the author who created the requirement, which is not necessarily the source of the requirement, just the person that entering the requirement in the system, but not the origin of the requirement. The stability, the requirement is going to change more or less. The priority, the status, the rationale of the requirement, the acceptance criteria if the requirement description is not enough, things like that. Okay. An important specific attribute is the priority. Okay, when talking about requirements, priority is always something to be taken into account. Different stakeholders are going to have different goals with the system, and of course they will have different priorities. Maybe for me it's more important to produce this report, but maybe for this user it's more important to get these other things from the system, or to include my suppliers information into the system, not getting reports out of them, whatever. Okay, so for that, some stakeholders' decisions carry more weight than others. So we have to assign weights to those stakeholders, and based on that, decide which requirements are going to be implemented first. Okay, so basically, not everything can have a high priority, like in this Dilbert cartoon. Not everything can be essential, critical, or must have. Okay, we have to establish realistic priority values. So take into account that setting a low priority doesn't mean that the feature won't be implemented or included. It means that probably if we have to get something for the first version, for the first release, maybe those things with low priority will be implemented last, but that doesn't mean that we are not going to implement it at all. Okay, but at the end the time is there, so we have to take that into account. So that's what priority is for. It's important to prioritize. Having all the attributes in high priority is the same as having them in low priority. It doesn't mean anything. Okay. As an example for prioritization, I want to just share with you very fast, very quickly, the Karl Wiegers matrices that allow me to assign different priorities to the elements. Basically, we have to group the different features in these cases, but they can be features or they can be requirements. It's a technique for prioritizing. Doesn't need to be just a requirement. Okay, and what we have to do is just create this kind of table, this kind of matrix with all their features or all their requirements, and then we have to assign values from 1 to 9, with 9 being the highest. to the relative benefit of including that feature of that requirement in the system. And at the same time, we have to assign a value from 1 to 9, again 1 is the lowest, 9 is the highest, to the relative penalty if the feature or the requirement is not included into the system. Okay, so as you can see here, what we can do is just say, okay, for the feature 1, the benefit is going to be 8, so it's really beneficial to include that into the system, and the penalty for not including that is going to be 4, so it's not so bad if we not put that into the system. Then we just add those two values, and that gives us a relative number percentage. Okay, for that we are going to do that the same for all the features. For example, for the feature 3 in this example, the benefit is 9 for including that, and the penalty is 9 for not including that. So it's super important to include that feature. So at the end, we are going to assign weights, just create a percentage for those values. And at the end, we get a percentage value for each feature. Apart from those benefits and penalty relative values, we are going to also assign, again, a number from 1 to 9 for quantifying the relative cost, okay, and also the relative risk. Those values must be assigned by the technical team, which is probably more aware of those values of the relative cost and the relative risk. So at the end, this is an example of 4 features for a word processor, okay, like the spell check, the grammar check, the indexing, the table of contents, the wizard table. Okay, basically we just assign the benefits, the penalties, the relative costs, and the relative risk, and based on that information, we can just automatize a way for getting a priority. Okay. Take into account that maybe we have one of these metrics for each different point of view that we have for each different stakeholder that we have into the system. That could be an option, but it's going to give us something to start, something that will allow us to assign priorities with a more formal way than just saying this is high, this is medium, or this is low. Okay, so this is just, as I was mentioning, this is just an example for prioritizing my requirements or my features. And what we are going to do now is just jump to a virtual machine and allow me to show you how we can work with the attributes in a professional tool, in this case, in the Visure requirement. What I'm going to do just very fast is just open the tutorial project of Visure requirement. And from here, I can connect to this surgical imaging, which is our tutorial project. Well, for the this is the first time that we are going to watch Visure requirement in this webinar series. It's a bit funny because we are a tool manufacturer, but it was important to just introduce all the requirements concept. Now we are ready for start working with our requirements tool. The first thing is that we are going to log in into the project. We are going to use an admin user. This admin user is going to be administrator of the project, so we will have rights for modifying anything. We can create requirement, modify existing requirement, change any attribute, whatever. But of course, depending on the access right, we will have limited access for each feature. Okay, in this case, as an administrator, I can change anything. So I'm logging in into the project, and the first thing that I'm going to get is just a specification-like view, Microsoft Word-like view of my project. Okay, in this case, you can see that I have got here several type of elements, all of them mixed together: user requirement, system requirement, and system test, and also some subtype of element. The user requirements can be classified into marketing requirements, standards, business rules. That's because that's the template that we have used for this project. Of course, the user can create their own types, their own attributes, whatever. If you allow me to do that, I'm going to switch to a more Microsoft Excel-like view with the same info, but in an Excel-like environment, which is probably more helpful for working with the requirements attributes. As you can see here, for each attribute, for each requirement, I have got a description in the bottom part of the screen, which is the requirement definition. Okay, so the system shall, whatever. But I have got also several columns in here. Let me just to make it bigger. Several columns in here that are giving me extra or additional information, basically my attributes, the one that they have defined for this project and for this type of elements, in this case, the system requirements. So for each element, I have got the following attributes. I have got a code. The code is a unique identifier that is going to allow me to just assign a way for identifying the element itself. Okay, so it's important to have some mechanism for identifying the elements, and maybe the description is just too long. Okay, so in this case, I have defined the prefix, suffix, and the numbering system, and the tool is automatically, every time I create an element, the tool is going to automatically just suggest a new code. Okay. Then I have got the name or the title, which is just a short description, just a sentence, something quick: security, packaging, car mobility, that allow me to just reference the requirement. Okay, just name the requirement easily, not the whole description. Then I have got the version author, which is the user in the system that has performed the last modifications in the requirements. Okay, there's a complete history with all the changes saved in Visure requirements, but as today's webinar is not about change management, it's not about changes, I'm going to be focusing just on the attributes. So version author just contain the person who performed the last modifications. The creation date is when this requirement was created, and also if needed, exactly the time and hour. The estimated effort, which is just a number that represent in hours. I can modify it, of course. The effort estimated for implementing this requirement. I've got also another attribute representing the affected system. In this case, it's a multi-valued attribute because I can have several values. For example, this requirement is going to affect system A and system C. Okay, if that makes sense. So I can just assign several values to the same attribute. So we can have different kind of attributes, as you can see, date attributes, numeric attributes, textual attributes, multi-valued attributes, even pickup list or enumerated attributes. For example, I've got here a priority, which is just high, medium, low, because I have defined it in this way. So I can just go here and say, okay, the priority of this requirement is going to be high or medium or whatever. Okay. Additionally, I have got an status attribute. The status attribute is also a pickup list or an enumerated attribute, just a set of values. As you can see here, it can be ready for review, approved, rejected. But there is something specific about this attribute, which is that, for example, in this case and in the status ready for review, if I double click, I can go to the status review, to the status more info needed. Let's just jump to review. Now that I'm in the review status, I can just go to on hold, reject, or approve. Let's go to put that on hold. Okay, so basically, depending on the current status, I can modify or I can just transition to different status. Okay, that is because we have defined an attribute workflow associated to the status attribute. By means of this workflow, allow me to show you. I can just create a state diagram in which each one of the values is going to be a different state. And I can define the variable transitions. So, for example, in this case, I have created those 6 values, and I have defined the different transition between them. So, if I am the status ready for review, I can go to more info needed or to review, but I cannot approve it directly. I have to go first to review it. Okay. Additionally, it's also possible by means of the tool to configure which users are going to be able to perform the transition. So, for example, not everyone in the project is going to be able to reject a requirement, only the business analyst or only the system engineer or whatever. Of course, those are the authorized roles in this project, the authorized user group, but I can define more user groups. I can create my own user groups. take into account that everything that we are watching today has been configured for the tutorial project, but we can manage everything, we can change everything. The attributes, the workflows, anything can be changed, can be configured in order to fit, in order to match your current way of working on your project. That's one of the strong point of Visure requirements. Okay, so from here I can define the different viable transition, and also I can configure some tasks in order to be automatized when performing the transition. For example, every time I reject a requirement, I want to send an email letting the user know that I am rejecting this requirement or whatever. Okay, so let's close this and go back to the Excel-like view of the requirement. Sorry. And another thing that I would like to show you, it's another mechanism for prioritizing the requirement. You have seen that I can define an attribute priority with high, medium, low, or like in the Dilbert diagram, must have, critical, or super important, whatever. But I can define those values, of course. But I can also use a prioritization tool included into this requirement that is going to allow me to assign weights for the different attributes. So for example, I can define that the affected system, in my case, if the affected system by the requirement is going to be system A, it's really important. I'm going to assign a value of 3. The system C, it's also regular important, not so important. And the system B is not important at all. So I'm going to assign a weight of 1 to all these. And based of these weights that I have assigned, the tool is going to tell me exactly what's the most priority, what's the most important requirement based on of this information. Okay, that's fine. The affected system is something to take into account, but the estimated effort is going to be also something to take into account. Let's change this color, for example. So let's put some weight to that attribute also. It's the same weight as for the affected system. Well, let's switch to a different color. This is horrible. Green, probably. Okay. Or, well, the estimated code is going to be even more important, a way of 2. So as you can see here, what I'm just doing is just assigning weights to the different values of my current attributes. So for example, if a requirement is coming for the customer or is affecting to the system A, it's so much important that those affecting to the system B. Additionally, I want also to minimize the effort. And so, yeah, by the way, this has to be a negative value in order to minimize the effort. I can just configure all that, okay? So I can just assign those weights, and based on those weights, I'm going to get some numeric priorities, just a more formal way to establish a prioritization, not just saying high, medium, low. I can even take that into account, saying, okay, and also I'm going to take the, let's say, the relative priority established by this user. So those with this one, those with high priority are going to be more important than those with medium and those with low, taking into account that this priority is something that the user has entered by themselves, something like that. So we are adding more things here. And now I can save all this information, for example, in this attribute, in this numeric attribute, in this numeric priority attribute, okay? And by updating these attributes, what I'm going to do is just update the information into the system and just upload this into the numeric priority attributes. And based on that, I will be able to, at the end, just say, okay, so based on these calculations, we can say that this is the most important element for me. Yes, I want to exist. Okay, so now you can see that I've got this numeric priority with different values and can say sort descending. So based on my weights and the weights that I have assigned, sorry, the other way around, descending. No, it's fine. So based on this, the most important requirement to be implemented is this one, then this one, then this other one, and things like that. Okay. Oh, at the end, I just put the effort in a positive value. So the more effort, the more important is going to be the requirement. That's probably not the best way to do it, but something to take, something that we can just play with. Okay. So that's another mechanism for establishing some priorities for my requirements. Okay. Well, there are much more things to be discussed about attributes in Visure requirements, but I don't want to go just much further with the demonstration. I just want to keep it simple, to keep it quick. So what I'm going to do is just go back to my slides, if you allow me to. And what I'm going to do is just summarize what we have seen today, and then switch to the question and answer section. Okay, so like we have said today, requirements management include among requirement management is basically a set of tasks that we are going to do in order to support the whole requirements engineering process. Those tasks include, among others, tracing, assigning attributes, which includes the priority and the prioritization, and also controlling changes on the requirement. Okay. Today we have focused on assigning attributes and also prioritizing. In a future webinar, we will be talking about tracing the requirements or linking the requirements, and also about controlling the changes of the requirement. In order to assign attributes to the requirements, take into account that they represent information that is inherent to the requirement. We have to keep balance between the number of attributes that we want to have into the system, which probably are as much as possible, but also between that and the work that we are willing to do, which means that probably less attributes are not so bad. We have to assign a responsible for each attribute, define access rights for each attribute. Maybe this user is allowed to modify this attribute. Maybe this user is not allowed to modify this other one, or things like that. And also we have talked about priority and prioritization and different techniques. We have seen Karl Wiegers matrices. We have seen also how we can assign different weights into Visure requirements and things like that. And finally, we have also seen workflows, how we can define different transition between different status, things like that. That has been today's webinar. Now we are going to jump or to switch to the question and answer section, but I'm not going to record this part. So for those that are watching us from a YouTube channel or for any other media, thank you for your attention. And I would like to just remember that this is the 5th webinar of the series. There are at least 4 more webinars and probably a 6th and a 7th one at least in the series. So I will just like to just recommend those webinars to you. And also I would like to remember you that you can access to our website www.visuresolutions.com and access to an evaluation version of Visure Requirement, our tool, and just download it and play with it and just see exactly what we have been doing in the webinar. Do it by yourself, adapting that to your very own project. So thank you all of you. Thank you very much for your attention and have a nice day. Goodbye.